They gave me confetti.
Welcome back to the Sports Business Take Podcast, your home for sports industry news with a little personality. Hopefully you guys just saw Zach's confetti in the background. I don't know what he did to do that, but that's a great start, a great vibe to start with. I'm Paul Hine. He is Zach Creekmore. How you doing today, Zach?
I'm doing good, Paul. How are you doing, brother?
Dude, I'm good. I'm definitely really tired. So obviously you guys didn't hear this, but this is our second take of doing this. I totally messed up our intro the first time we tried to do this. I have all 8 a.m. classes except for Friday. It's Thursday night, so it has been a long week. I'm still adjusting to it. And this is our first week back on campus, back in St. Joe's, and we're already battling with the Wi-Fi again. We had to try getting in here like 3 different times. So, yeah, it's been an interesting week. So we'll see how this goes. But definitely a lot of interesting stuff to. Oh, I didn't ask you how your first week of classes was. By the way, how was your first week of classes?
I'm gonna say good. How have your first week of classes been, Paul?
Honestly, pretty good. I think I only have one hard class, and I think I feel more locked in now than I did last semester. I don't know why. Maybe I just need like the refresh of the break, but I definitely feel like I'm more locked in now, and hopefully like I can keep that. I think I got to take better notes this semester. So like I started out really well at the beginning of last semester, and then I kind of tailed off toward the end. So I think I'm just going to try to keep really good notes throughout the semester this semester.
Building that consistency.
Yeah. Exciting announcement. I will be videoing your swim meet on Saturday.
Hey, that's sick. Let's go.
Yeah, dude, I'm actually so excited. I went to Megan and Corey, the bosses in our SID department, and you know, I told them like, hey, I got this internship for videography over the summer. I'm really trying to get some experience. And they, as soon as I said that, they booked me for the next time they could, which is awesome. So thankful for that. So hopefully that'll help me get ready for my internship over the summer. So super excited to do that. And I'll be sure to take some fire pics of you for sure.
You're going to have a lot of takes of just my voice being very loud.
Yeah,
I fill that pool with all my voice. It's great.
Yeah.
All my soul.
Okay. Yeah, just like on the podcast.
Oh, absolutely.
Speaking of filling things, you're using your soul. Look at my t-shirt, Chase Dreams.
Hey, love it.
Got this for Christmas. I love it as a pump cover for the gym. And yeah, so we're a little inspirational sometimes, not preachy, but a little inspirational. So I thought that was appropriate to wear for a recording.
Absolutely.
But let's get into our main topic of the day. So today we are completely dedicating the whole episode to talking about the state of the NCAA and the new NIL rules or add-ons that came out of the NCAA convention this past week. So let's backtrack a little bit to the beginning of December. The NCAA just had its big yearly convention, but a few weeks prior, the president of the NCAA, Charlie Baker, former Mass governor, by the way, so like not to brag or anything, but I think that's pretty cool. He sent out a proposal that basically would have Division I college football schools as a separate entity. From what I understand, is a separate entity from the NCAA as a subdivision. So this is a radical proposal. First thoughts when you saw this?
First thoughts when I saw it was it made me immediately think of the European Super League, which was a concept of taking all the top clubs out of Europe and putting them into their own league. So really separating them from the rest of the clubs throughout Europe and putting them in kind of an elite competition where they're going to be able to really capitalize and make the most money possible. So I've been able to meet Mr. Baker or President Baker, if you're calling him president of the NCAA. I think that's applicable. Personally, I think he's a really smart guy and definitely has done an excellent job with the NCAA so far.
How did you meet him?
Through the NCAA South Conference I went to last spring, and he came and spoke to all of us as a group. So I got to introduce myself, give him a little solid handshake.
Yeah, that's cool.
Which was really cool. And very, very cool guy, very intelligent. So looking at this as a proposal, it's like, well, one, as we'll talk about later, it's really abandoning that NCAA we're not pay to play. We are
Amateurism.
not amateurism, right? Amateurism model. Thank you, Paul. And really looking to do that and develop what the NCAA will be for the next 20 to 30 years, which is a really hard thing to look at, and something where,
longer.
From a presidential perspective of him being in charge of the NCAA, is him looking to innovate and make the NCAA unique and different and change from what it's been for the last 100 years, which is a really hard thing to do because it's a set thing.
For sure, especially because the landscape of everything has been changing so fast in the last couple of years in college sports, and we've talked about that at length on the podcast already. But this proposal in particular is probably the most, I already said it, but radical thing that I've seen out there about how to reshape college sports. So, particularly college football. So, and I'm quoting from the article I read, Baker proposed a new subdivision of schools with the highest sources that would likely separate itself from the rest of the football subdivision to FBS, as well as the rest of Division One. So that's the FCS. That's a whole different conference of schools. Montana State just won their championship a couple weeks ago with its own rules and regulations. The remaining schools in FBS would still have access to the college football playoff. So this is super interesting. By the way, I got that from a CBS article, CBS Sports. But the new subdivision of schools with the highest resources, that sounds to me, and I it's interesting because we talked about this in one of my classes today in sports governance, like this kind of model. This would create basically a world where for football, the schools that had the most money, that had the most funding, aka the biggest schools like the Michigans, Alabamas of the world, would like far outweigh the competition in terms of like attraction value and just the money that they could invest into their program to like make the program successful. The teams with the most money would be the most successful, and there's like no question about it. So what do you think? Do you think it would create kind of an imbalance even among just that division?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're looking at something where we're setting apart the top 5% of all D1 football programs and saying, you guys are going to be the elite of the elite. You're going to have your own competition, your own rules, your own set of things that you have to follow, which entirely involve financial differences and money, the amount of money they're allowed to pour into their football program, the amount of money they're allowed to give to their players, and a couple of other things involved with that, including NIL deals being kind of unlimited. There's no ceiling on the amount of money that you could make.
Yeah,
right.
And we'll get to that when we talk about NIL, but that is crazy.
Which is absolutely insane. So it creates a huge imbalance where, one, the top prospects, they're not going to be willing to go to any other school. So you're not going to see a top prospect who is recruited by all these schools pick a smaller team or a different school because of academic purposes or because of this is where I really want to go or because of a really good coach. So you're seeing this all change, and it's like, well, now you're really looking at a kind of NFL v. XFL type situation where there's two different really divisions, and it's really clear where everyone wants to be, and this is kind of just the best of the rest, and no one should be here if you're trying to play at the elite level.
Yeah, there's so many different things that I want to touch on what you just said, but let's start with, essentially it would mean that the large percentage of the NCAA's revenue generated from the college football playoffs would only belong to these schools, right? It would not be distributed to other schools throughout the NCAA. And for those who don't know about the NCAA's revenue, I don't know what the percentage is, but like a very vast majority of the NCAA revenue is generated from the college football playoff media attention, ticket sales, and also the March Madness tournament. But particularly from the college football playoff side, that money goes down to a lot of the rest of the schools in the NCAA outside of Division I sports. It's basically how Division II and Division III sports are even possible, right, and even can be funded, is through both of those things, the playoffs and the tournament, the basketball tournament. So if you say that only the teams in Division I in this separate subdivision could use this money, then you're taking substantial funding away from hundreds of other universities across the country, and that could affect sports programs and athletes in a way that is unprecedented, right? We're talking,
Mm.
One of my professors brought this up, by the way, in class the other day. Professor Woodside said, I wonder if Division III sports will even exist, right? And I mean, I don't know if it would get that extreme, but I thought it was an interesting question, right? And nobody knows the answer to that right now, but the money that funds Division III sports, like at St. Joseph's College, like where we are, I mean, like a lot of that is trickle down from Division I schools, and I don't think a lot of people know that. I think people think it's like boosters and like and donors that donate to the school to fund the athletics, or former athletes even donating to the school to fund the athletics program. And in some cases that can be true, but like most of the money in Division III and even some Division II sports, a lot of Division II sports comes from those two sources. So what do you think about that whole idea? What do you think about that impact?
Yeah, Paul, first of all, I want to compliment you, man. Best take I have ever heard come out of your mouth. So well said. Beautiful.
Thank
Like,
you.
beautiful, magnificent. Okay. And we're thinking about it here, and that's seriously the problem. When I was at NCAA South literally a year ago, a year and a little bit less than a
So
year
were you
ago,
at the
right?
convention?
Yeah.
Was that the
No, not this
convention?
past one. Not this past one.
Not this one,
But
but I'm
that
saying
was,
the year before.
no, South is Student Athlete Leadership Forum. But we
Okay.
did go, and so it was all student athletes from around the nation coming, D1, D2, D3 coming together, and
Yeah.
all of the presidents of each division came and talked to each division, right? So I met Mr. Baker. I met the president of D3. I forget his name, but really
Did
great
he
people,
raise
nice
the
guys.
same concerns? Obviously, the proposal
Yes.
wasn't out at the time, but about that
So
type of model.
when we were there, the major concern and major discussion was pay for play models, right? And the real discussion was D3 realistically, and why we're so opposed to it is it cannot function with that model because schools with our size, with our budget, probably can't afford it, right? And
No.
realistically, they
And a
can't.
lot of
So
schools are having trouble staying open in the first place and having budget problems already. Then you have to jack up the tuition to the point where students don't even want to attend, right? It's already expensive to attend private universities that are small in New England in particular, honestly, because we have that reputation in this part of the country that we have good schools. So, I mean, it's already expensive, really expensive to go to college to the point where you're asking kids to take out loans that can affect their life for a decade plus. You're really gonna up the tuition just so you can pay your players. Like, I get it in a sense for Division I sports, but I feel like you have to still allow some of that revenue, like take a percentage of it and say this percentage is going to be allotted for the rest of the NCAA because they can't function without it. And maybe that isn't fair to the Division I guys, but I mean, it's the trade-off, right? It's, make, let's say, a few hundred Division I football and basketball players a couple $100,000 extra, or fund 25 to 100 Division III schools, their entire athletic programs, right? And that's just me guessing, right? I don't know the exact numbers of how that would work out, but I mean, the basic principle there is, I mean, where would the money come from if it didn't come from the Division I revenue, right? Like, it's a really interesting question that we don't have an answer to.
Correct, absolutely, and that's what makes it really concerning for people like us who were athletes at D3, D2 schools, or even athletes who are at smaller D1 schools, right? Where you're seeing the revenues from these really important NCAA competitions be so important to how the school operates, especially how the athletics operates.
Yeah.
So we'd be looking at an entire kind of divisional shift of
seriously.
One, does D3 exist anymore? Two, what happens to D2?
That would be a
restructure?
Shame. That would really be a shame because then you're taking, it's already a low percentage of people that play sports in college, and you're taking probably, let's be honest, Division III schools around the country, there's a lot more than people realize. There's a lot of small schools like ours. You're taking like hundreds, maybe like thousands of kids away from opportunities that they wouldn't get otherwise. And even in smaller Division Ones, I know I'm talking a lot, sorry, and I interrupted you, but even in smaller Division Ones, like they wouldn't be able to compete because they just wouldn't have the resources. That's really what this is about, is how do you allocate your resources? And I think there has to be some balance. Like, I understand the concept, and I think like this has been the direction for a while that the NCAA is going in, and I don't disagree with the pay for play model entirely, but there's got to be some boundaries around it. It's got to be somewhat controlled, because if it's not, the spiral effect will, I mean, I don't even know what it's going to do yet, right? There's so many different things you can talk about, whether it's scholarship money, money to fund schools like ours, recruiting pipelines. How does that all work out in this scenario? Let's talk about that recruiting. What do you think this does to recruiting?
It's hard to say, right? We would really need to see how and what schools end up in that kind of top bracket, and what the restructuring of D1 football looks like, especially D1 sports overall. And it's weird because this seems so specific to football and really that top 10%, rather than it affecting the rest of other sports. So I'd be really interested to see what the proposal looks like when you take into account that you're taking, let's say, a University of Alabama and putting their football team and just their football team in this elite region. What happens to the volleyball team and the soccer team?
Right.
And because there's not just one sport for this entire school, but this one sport is now making more money than every other sport at the school or every other sport in their region. And it's kind of hard to say, where does the balance come from, right? So I want to, look at the restructuring and how it affects the other sports. What's happening there? Do we see a change in how viewership deals work? Does the NCAA take money from that really big group and really try to optimize the amount of money they make, and then again take a 25% cut and redistribute it to all divisions? That's a possibility. But for recruiting,
that would be what we were talking about with balancing it out a little bit.
Exactly.
Redistribution.
Right. And then with the recruiting, I think you're really looking at how does a smaller school, let's say, I don't know, maybe a Utah, right? I don't know. Would Utah be in that top 10?
Utah's pretty big.
Okay, give me a smaller school.
They're Power 4. Merrimack College.
Merrimack. Okay, so let's look at a Merrimack, right?
They just turned D1 like 2 years ago.
Right, so they wouldn't be in that big time. Yeah. So let's say Merrimack, and we're talking, how does a smaller school like that go and recruit somebody who's going to make their program better, and how would they progressively, and we all know I'm obsessed with a relegation promotion system. Is there any way that a smaller school can get into that Big Ten or get into that
relegation promotion system? Would be super interesting for college sports,
right? It would be amazing,
especially under a pay-for-play model.
Yes, absolutely, because you really get to, as a program, reap the rewards of finding success. And as a college athlete, you could say, I'm going to go to a school and I'm going to make this school the best that I can make it. And we're going to rise the ranks. And one, viewership is going to rise for all divisions. And two, we're really going to be able to create that passion and those amazing storylines where we can see a Merrimack, right? The reason people like the Washington storyline so much, and I was looking at it, and I don't know where we're looking at Washington in terms of all this, but they are an underdog story, right? No one expects them to go and make the national championship, but they love that and they want to cheer for that and they want to support that, right? They want to see a team like that succeed at the highest level because there's a storyline attached to it. So even it creates more storylines for the NCAA, which would be super interesting.
Did we just fix college sports, by the way? I feel like what we just said might fix it. Kind of.
I don't think it fixes it overall, but it's an interesting solution to discuss, right?
Yeah.
It's an interesting option. It's another thing we're throwing out there.
Yeah.
Putting our hat in the ring. I'll call Mr. Baker up. He'll give me a ring.
Charlie, you met Zach before. Just listen to him for ideas.
And then how does that recruitment trickle down? So what happens to an athlete who maybe wants to go to one of those top teams but doesn't get the option? Do they even consider playing college sports anymore in the first place? Because the other schools just don't have the same draw.
I think a lot of people won't consider playing college sports anymore. A lot of people have schools that they would love to go to for career purposes or for education purposes, but you know, they also want to continue to play their sport in college. And if they can do both, that's awesome. But then this would force a lot of kids to say, oh, if that school doesn't have the money for me and I can make an extra $4 million at another place or something, why wouldn't I do that at this point in my life where I have no financial stability on my own, but I can create that for myself now?
Mm,
Or I can take this other offer to go to this school where I really, really want to go, but not have as much financial stability and maybe even be in debt. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Depending on walk-on situation and that kind of stuff. That's another thing is, do walk-ons even exist anymore? Right? That's completely different. And then from the recruiting side, how do you recruit kids now that you're for football specifically, now that you're just paying players to come to your school instead of recruiting them under the guidelines of this is a prestigious program. Our coach has been here for 20 years. Look at all these championships, those types of aspects of your program. Instead of saying that, you're saying, here's $10 million, come play for us. Right? Like, it completely changes the landscape of recruiting forever, unless they change the rule back, which I don't see it happening unless it massively falls on its head. But I mean, even then, recruiting becomes super cutthroat at this point, right? And high school kids are going to be forced to grow up a lot faster, because at 14, at 15, you're getting offers of $10 million, $12 million to go play for a school that you hadn't even thought about yet. You know what I mean? You're 15, 16 years old. Usually you're not even thinking about college yet, but then you're forced to grow up a little faster, right? And
Mm.
that completely changes the entire high school athletic experience and college athletic experience. And then to even extend further than that, how does paying players in college affect things like the NFL draft? Right? We're already seeing that, where I'll use a good example from this year. Marvin Harrison Jr., who did declare for the NFL draft, the wide receiver at Ohio State, almost stayed at Ohio State for an extra year because he was offered so much NIL money, and he thought he would almost make more staying at Ohio State than in his first year in the NFL. And
Which is a huge statement.
I just threw
Huge
a lot out
statement.
there. So
No, you're good. You're good. And it is just absolutely insane, right? We're looking at it, and I think one, especially for recruitment, we're looking at how does the NIL all structure, which I know we have a little bit
yeah,
more to talk about in a minute. Um,
yeah,
but how does that structure for the difference between this 5% and this 95% of schools and
yeah.
football programs, right? Is there
Are
a
there
different
different
set of rules
standards?
for this group,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or is there the same set of rules where they can really kind of try and say, hey, we're going to invest a lot of money into our football team because we want to try and rise and become better. Maybe have a question of getting into this group, but when
Yeah,
you put a different set of rules and you entirely eliminate the opportunity to possibly get into that, what it immediately creates is the top 5% that's going to continue to grow and a 95% that's going to continuously and kind of without hope die out, right?
yeah.
Because
The
they aren't
competitive
competing
advantage
at that
is
same level.
so imbalanced or potentially so imbalanced in this model. I do want to point out. We're already 20 minutes into talking about this, but I do want to point out that it did say, the article that I read from Sports Business Journal and CBS did make it clear that it won't be actionable for the foreseeable future,
Mm.
which means it won't go in right away. Right. I think they want to see how a few years play out with NIL and the direction that it's going, but it is being talked about, which is why we're talking about it. And they're already making changes to NIL. So I think logically the next step from NIL is paying players full time, but is college football, is this proposal the first step into it? Do you then, the next step after that, start paying other sports in the same way? You know, like, where does this take us 10, 15, 20 years down the line? And neither you or I have an answer to that, but it's so interesting to think about the hypotheticals.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is an impossible answer to find, but the hypotheticals are, man, world building, just
I think,
amazing, record breaking.
yeah, I think this quote that I found in the CBS Sports article really captures it. All of it signals a revolution, an admission that the
Mm.
college or the collegiate model, the NCAA so doggedly endorsed, is dead. Amateurism in college sports is dead. Think about that for a second. That changes literally everything the world knows about collegiate sports, at least in the US. At least in the US, that changes everything that collegiate sports was founded upon, right? And I'm not saying I disagree with the whole pay for play model. I don't disagree with it because there are a lot of revenues that I like the players have earned a part of. They have earned a part of that because they're the ones who produce the product that makes those revenues. But there's got to be some regulations around it because right now, like we mentioned before, the NIL endorsement side of that would be unregulated. There's no sum of money that is a cap. You need some kind of cap because if you don't have a cap, then it's the companies and the schools with the most money will succeed the most, and there's no competitive balance.
Mm. Absolutely, and you're absolutely correct. And as we talk about this, and as I think about this, I really think what President Baker is trying to do here is provide an idea and a concept that is so far away from the NCAA model that schools and ads and all these different people who are involved with these divisions and Division 1, Division 2, Division 3 can really have these really hypercritical conversations where we can identify and realize as a group of schools and colleges throughout the United States, this is not the direction we want to go in, right?
Yeah.
And then we can then go and identify, okay, what does
Yeah.
NIL need to be, right? Take it to an extreme, and then can we
Yeah.
build it back down and say, here's where we want to be, because the NCAA has preached and believed in
That's
this
a good
amateurism
point.
model
That's
for
a
so
really
long.
good point. Yeah, that's a really
So
good
I
point.
really hope and believe
Yeah.
that's what he's trying to do.
Yeah, that this is like the extreme, and then it kind of settles somewhere in the middle as they negotiate and vote and that kind of stuff. And the legislation process goes along. I mean, that's certainly what could happen, and that's definitely the most likely outcome because I don't see a proposal this radical being voted in without at least some amendments. You know what I mean? Because I mean, if I was a Division 3 athletic director, I not that I would be in uproar about this, but I would be like, what do you expect us to do now? Right? Like, can you give us a solution, or do we have to find the solution ourselves of how to deal with the money that we are no longer receiving from the college football playoffs? And not necessarily that Division 3 has like earned any of that money. Like, I'm not saying that, but how do you fund Division 3 sports outside of that? I mean, really, the solution is, like I said earlier, for each individual college to jack up their tuition prices, their housing prices, which parents, kids, nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. Um,
I don't need more debt.
yeah, exactly. Right. As college kids,
I don't need more
as
debt.
college kids,
Don't put it
we
in my
can relate
pocket.
to that. Yeah, exactly. So it's super interesting to see how they're going to solve this, how it's all going to shake out, and not only what the landscape of the rest of the divisions, Division 2 and Division 3, could look like, but what the rest of Division 1 could look like. Because this is just the Power 4 conferences. This is just the Big 12, Big 10, SEC, and ACC. The Power 4, Pac 12 basically no longer exists. So it was the Power 5, now it's the Power 4. So it's just those Power 4 conferences that are getting this money now, right? They're keeping it all for themselves. But what about the rest of Division 1 sports? Where does their revenue come from? Similar to, what the situation we would be in, right? At St. Joseph's College. So, I mean, I would assume it's tuition, and it's, some smaller schools are on ESPN. They have some small conferences have deals with ESPN or have other media rights deals, but in general, not worth the large sums of money that those Power 4 conferences, big media deals collect, and therefore can't fully support. I'm sure they could somewhat support, but the standard of Division 1 athletics outside of those Power 4 conferences, the standard would be lowered in terms of the quality of the facilities, the money that they can invest into coaching, into recruiting, into their into their staffing, in their like sports information department equipment, all of that stuff gets affected. So it's a huge trickle down effect from this one decision that has so many different impacts that will be interesting to see how it shakes out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be really interesting. Really interesting to see where this goes, how people react to it, as this is very new, and as
Yeah.
we continue to kind of look at it and see what does the conversation develop
Yeah.
into.
I
And
don't think a
it's
lot of people know about this. That's the thing. I don't think a lot of people understand the magnitude of what is happening in college sports. And I think it'll take something like this going into effect to fully put into the minds of like the public that
mm,
this is a revolution that is going on within our country. If you think about it, college sports is a huge part of our country, right? Things like the Rose Bowl are one of the biggest national events of the year. And they don't realize that those events pay for so many different things outside of the money that goes just to the teams that are playing in those events. You know what I mean? So
yes,
I don't think a lot of people know how huge an effect a proposal like this would have. They just see, oh, Division One players should get a percentage of the money because, or even a vast majority of the money because they're the ones producing the product. And I don't disagree with that, but you have to think about the trickle down effect that it has, and you have to set some sort of cap or some percentage that also gets put to the side
mm,
for the rest of the universities that are under the NCAA, because it's a NCAA membership. When you join the NCAA as a university, it's you're trusting them to take care of you, right? You're trusting them to help govern you, and when they say this is actually our priority, and do you even feel like a member anymore? Do you see some schools start to leave the NCAA and go to conferences like the NIA? Interesting potential outcome of all of this, right? Um, and that's something that we don't know right now, but definitely could happen, you know, like specifically with a lot of the schools that can't necessarily compete with the pay for play system.
yeah, absolutely. And Paul, you're reading my mind here. I was thinking, do we see a mass exodus of NCAA D3, D2 schools, even D1 schools
It could
transferring to an
happen.
NIA model? And it absolutely could. The NIA has excellent structure. It has a lot of really good freedom. I have a friend who went to SEU, Southeastern University, and played baseball there. And NIA was the way to go for him. And it's been great. He likes his experience there. They have great sports. They're very competitive, right? And it gives
Yeah.
that school that
I don't think
freedom.
people realize that NAIA sports can be like really good.
Oh,
I had a coworker. I had a coworker over the summer with the Portland Sea Dogs who told me he went to play for an NAIA college down in Texas, or no, Tennessee. Sorry, Tennessee, not Texas. But he throws like 91, 92. Like, he's really good. You know,
yeah.
I don't think people realize that NAIA sports are like competitive. You know what I mean? And seeing, I think it would be really cool to see the effect of how schools leaving the NCAA and going to the NAIA would create competition wise. You know what I mean? Like, what kind of effect would that have? And that's a completely separate topic, but it's one that's
Mm,
relevant because it's a potential outcome of doing this. And this is only for football, but what if they did this for all the top Division One sports, for all the Power Four conference sports? Then really, where is the money coming from for the rest of the NCAA? You know what I mean? Um, and I wonder if they're saying it's just college football for now because the money that we're going to use to fund the rest of the schools is from the March Madness tournament. That's possible. That is 100% possible. But if once it's a slippery slope. If they take
mm.
if they take the March Madness money away too, what happens then?
Right. And
And
and the problem is the question is for now, right?
right.
How long is now? How long
Mm-hmm.
till you change it again? How long do you
Yeah.
until you realize that we're making so much more money doing this that we really don't care about the other schools? Like,
Yeah.
why do you matter? No, we're gonna make 500 million by just taking all the best March Madness
Yeah.
schools and putting them in the same division and letting them play basketball all year round. Like,
Yeah. We probably sound really biased and mad at the NCAA right now.
no,
But
and it's from an organizational perspective. If you're thinking about the NCAA's priority is solely to make money, it's a genius move,
yeah.
right? But that has never been the NCAA's priority,
No.
nor has it ever been the model that they believe in and support. So we're
No, it's
seeing
never
a
been their core
total
values.
exactly. We're seeing a total structural organizational belief system change because of money, which
Yeah.
for me as a person goes against with everything I believe in. Right?
I
Like I
agree.
would in an
I mean,
instant
yeah, I agree.
lose my head.
We are taking it a little bit to the extreme, and like I understand that. Like we're talking about hypotheticals 5-10 years down the line that may not even happen, and like I get that. Like people are going to see this and be like, you guys are overreacting. Like it's just because you're playing Division III sports and all that. Maybe that's true. We have a little bias in it, sure, but really what we're laying out is the fact that there are so many different factors that could come out of this decision, right? There are so many reasons to think about this. There's so many nuances to consider when fully voting on this decision, which I'm sure will happen at some point down the line. If they decide to vote on the proposal, they're going to have to consider all of these different nuances. What are we going to do to maintain competitive balance? Because and how do we legislate that? How do we regulate that? Because that's a huge issue. That's probably the biggest issue to come out of this. And then outside of all this hypothetical stuff, let's get to what we actually know, which is what came out of the conference this past week. So the proposal that we just talked about was a few weeks ago. May not happen for a few years if it does happen. But what we now know out of this conference is the NCAA will establish a voluntary database for agents and financial advisors working in the space, NIL meaning, for athletes to use as a resource to peruse through. So I really like this. That's pretty cool to me because you're basically streamlining the process for athletes to be able to get connected with agents and companies to help them out, right? That's a really good tool. That's a really good resource. So that's a very positive thing. What do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely agreed. Right. We're seeing something where rather than paying an athlete, we're seeing a divisional change of we want to offer more support. We know their goal is to play professional sports, so let's connect them with people who are going to help them teach them how to manage their money. Which, as
Yeah,
we've seen with certain athletes, especially once they've gone pro, they don't know how to do that, so they maybe
yeah.
go bankrupt. So, say a Shaquille O'Neal, right? And although
And
Shaq's
if you're
done an
gonna
excellent
pay,
job post, but
yeah,
yeah,
if you're
continue.
gonna pay college kids like this, I mean, you have to teach them how to manage their money because at this point in your life, and when you get into college, not everybody knows that. In fact, a lot of people don't know how to manage their money correctly when you're in
Mm,
college. You think, oh, I have so much time left in my life to make money. I don't need to be smart with my money, right? And a lot of kids think that. A lot of kids genuinely think that, and then you give them millions of dollars, it could make them a little reckless. Like we're not fully developed in that area yet. We're not fully financially literate yet. So I think providing them with a resource like this, like you said, it basically helps people get financially literate through agents, right? Which is
absolutely
super helpful. I really like this. This is a really good addition to NIL. Um,
agreed. Excellent step.
Requiring athletes to disclose NIL deals of over $600 within 30 days after entering or signing the agreement. So this includes contact information of the company, terms of the agreement, and the compensation that they're getting. So I like this because it provides some checks and balances. You know what I mean? You can't just sign an NIL deal worth millions of dollars and not tell the NCAA about it and have it go kind of be an under the table cash deal, that kind of thing, right? Which NIL really the space is like a wild wild west right now. That's really what the best way to describe it as because it's so new and because the policy is changing all the time. People are still figuring out what is okay, what isn't, what's in the gray area. And if you can, and a lot of athletes or a lot of schools, if they can find stuff in that gray area that they won't get in trouble for, they'll take advantage of it. So establishing this standard of you need to report it after 30 days if it's over $600 creates some stability around how these get reported, how these deals get reported, and how they get controlled, and how they get put into the NCAA's database, essentially.
Absolutely agree. Right? It's an excellent step to one, as you said, checks and balances. Two, legally, right? You're having something where you have a documented piece of this athlete has this contract, is in this state, is doing this, and especially if there's a limit on the amount of money that they can make from NIL based on the school they're attending or based on the division of school they're attending, like the NCAA was talking about.
That's an interesting question.
With the other thing,
ask you,
right?
Do you think there should be a cap? Sorry to interrupt you, but do you think there should be a cap?
I don't think there should be a cap. I think
okay.
giving an athlete the freedom to capitalize on what they do. So, like, say one athlete has a really, really strong social media following, they should be able and allowed to capitalize on that. So, like, look at Olivia Dunn.
That's
right?
fair.
She has an amazing social media following. She totally deserves to be able to capitalize on that. Now,
that's so fair.
Do we see it become a problem where other athletes lose opportunities because this athlete has a better social media following? That's where it gets questionable for me, right? So it is a kind of gray area where I'm split of, like, do we put a cap on it? Do we make it a really high cap, something that's like crazy? So say it's like 10, 15 million, right? And then
people are already getting paid that, by the way.
Right, exactly. Right? Do we go and say, okay, that makes sure
close to that point.
Does that make sure that other athletes might see more of that money because companies are going to say, okay, I'm going to look for other people because this person already is all booked up? Do we limit the amount of sponsorships they're allowed to have? So maybe they have unlimited money they can make, but they can only have like 5 or 6 different sponsors.
I have an interesting idea.
Yes.
What if you put a cap for each school? Not like specific to each school, but I mean, like, over all Division I schools, each school can only allow X amount of NIL money per athlete. Something like that, right?
Which would, again, be interesting.
Where then you take it into the hands of, you set a standard for the schools, but then you allow the schools to allocate that money how they want to, and you kind of put it in their hands to choose how they use it. I think that kind of could, in a way, solve the competitive imbalance. At least, maybe not completely solve, but I think it could be one step in helping to solve the competitive balance if you set a standard. I think really, when we're talking about competitive balance, that's what we're talking about, is how do you set a standard?
Absolutely, and I think you're right. Setting a standard and competitive balance where everything feels kind of fair is really important. But where it concerns me a little bit, right? We're talking about NIL, which is what? Name, image, and likeness, right? Yeah. So if we're saying there's a cap for an entire school, well, say this person's name, image, and likeness is a lot more valuable than this person's name, image, and likeness, right? How does that balance out? It's like, well, I'm more valuable. A Manning, just the name alone, is more valuable than Creekmore sitting there, right? So does it become that hard balance? And it's a hard thing to find a solution for, right?
I mean,
it's
like
so
a wide
new,
receiver,
there's so many nuances.
To your point, a wide receiver at Ohio State is going to be worth more than a wide receiver at Merrimack College. That's just the way it is. And so, absolutely. I guess that is a factor to consider when thinking about that. But then how do you specify? It's really interesting. How do you specify for each tier? Do you create tiers of within Division I and change the cap for each tier? Maybe that's a solution to what we're talking about, where you say the Power 4 conference schools are in the top tier and they have a higher cap, and then below that are the rest of the Division I schools and they have a lower cap than the rest of the Power 4 conference schools. That's possible. That's a possible solution to what we're talking about. There's just so many different directions that they can go. it's actually crazy how many
It's
different things could come out of this.
it's mind blowing, right? It's
I don't
just
think we've ever talked about a singular topic for 45 minutes, by the way.
it's okay. We probably haven't.
No, this
Right?
is a good I'm saying this is a good thing. Like that's why we like there are so many different outcomes that we could literally talk about this all night if we wanted to. We could. We could
I could
stay
be
up
up till
all
2
night.
a.m.
Yeah, exactly. We could stay up all night and talk about this because there are so many different things that are possible, right? And nobody knows yet. That's the interesting part is that nobody knows yet, right? Um, okay, the last thing that we do know for certain to come out of the NIL additions from the NCAA convention is they will be working with the member institutions and athletes to create a standardized NIL contract. So that is what we were just talking about, right? That's creating an even playing field.
Mm.
Your
One,
thoughts?
creating an even playing field, but also creating an even set of legalities of
Yeah.
every NIL deal should look like this. And if it
Yeah.
doesn't, there is a problem. That's a
Yeah.
red flag. We have to look at
Checks
this
and
company and
balances.
see and look at this school. Are they doing the thing right? Right? Which
This
is
relates
so
so much to
important.
my sports governance class right now, by the way. I just started taking sports governance this semester. I've only had 2 classes. Today was one of them. So that's actually where I got the idea for this episode was in that class. But I
Love it.
think that you do have to have some kind of way to govern the NIL deals. You do have to because like I said earlier, otherwise it's the wild wild west. Nothing's controlled and the teams and donors with the most money will just control everything. Everything. And that's thousands of people's lives, controlling thousands of people's lives essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it is the amount of people impacted by one decision, immense, and it's insane. And
This is the
making
biggest
sure that it's
decision
balanced is so
in the
important.
history of college sports. I'm going to put it
Yeah,
out there. It is. It's the biggest
absolutely.
decision in the history of college sports. We're at a crossroads where it's no turning back. It's either you make it and you decide to go to a professional style model or you don't and you say we're going to continue to do this amateur path, but the piece of our professional model is going to be NIL, right? And honestly, I think with some more rules and regulations, I think the NIL model can work out in the long term without becoming a full on pay for play.
Mm.
But I don't necessarily think the pay for play has to be viewed as a bad thing. I don't think it has to be viewed as a bad. Like we've talked a lot about the negative impacts of it on the show today, but it would help a lot of schools. It would. But you have to make sure that it doesn't hurt a large percentage of others. So it's how do you find that middle ground, that solution that gets both goals accomplished?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're talking about how can we find the compromise. And we've talked about a lot about what needs to be compromised, but not in entirety what the compromise looks like because no one really knows right now. And
Yeah.
it's such a hard thing to find. And I think, and I don't want to talk about politics or anything, but like right now we're going to an election year. And in my opinion, I'm looking at a country that I see more divided than ever. Right? We have
Yeah.
people who are here, people who are here, people who are here, people who are here. And it's impossible to say what our nation needs or what our sports needs. But what we need to
Yeah.
say is here's a thing where we need to try and find a common ground, a compromise where everyone can live and be happy. And we can see a more unified nation, a more unified NCAA, a more unified thing of sports
Yeah.
where we can all come together. And that's really what I hope to see come out of something like this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you just have to find the compromise where the NCAA should be able to exist as it is and still fairly compensate the people who generate the majority of the revenue. Like I do, like I said, I understand that piece of it. Like you do have, I believe you do have to do that because once you work, my fundamental belief is once you work hard on something, you then earn that thing. You know what I mean? So if the players working hard in college football means that they earn some money, it means that they earn some money. You know what I mean? If that means that they generate revenue, then they should get a piece of that money. I agree, but I don't think you can do that while hindering a bunch of other factors or a bunch of other members in the NCAA.
And absolutely, that's what we're really trying to identify. Like I,
I know I'm starting to repeat
in all
myself, by
honesty,
the way.
believe you're good. We totally all want to see a large portion of the athletes who do the best work and probably have worked some of the hardest work they have in their lives to achieve where they are, earn
Absolutely.
and receive what they deserve, right? In all reality, like I did not work as hard as a D1 soccer player because I chose other things and focused on other things and tried to do 6 different sports at once, right?
Yeah.
That's the reality of it.
Honestly,
And I
like,
think that person deserves that.
yeah, I mean, I think part of the beauty of Division 3 sports is being able to choose kind of a sport life balance, right?
Mm.
Like, let's say either one of us goes Division 1, I don't think that we have time to do something like we're doing right now. You know what I mean? At least I certainly wouldn't. You know I end up doing a lot of our social media work, so like I don't think I would have time to do that if I was playing Division 1 sports. So it really is such a commitment that they do deserve it, right? They do deserve it. But I'm not going to repeat myself, but it's how do you compromise, right?
Mm.
I think that's the main point out of this proposal is it's going to be really interesting to see what solutions that they come up with to the problems that this proposal could potentially bring up.
Absolutely. And I think to kind of conclude on this, right? NCAA, we got a lot of work to do. Call me and Paul up. Make sure we're at the conference. We'll be happy to talk with you, and we'll be happy to be
I
part
would
of those
be so
conversations that we
happy
want to
to
see.
I would be so happy to give ideas. I'm so serious. And think about how good that would look on our resumes too, just by the way. Not even to be like selfish like that, but I mean like it would I want to help people first and foremost, but I mean that would be pretty cool if I got to like have a say in that. That'd be dope.
Just to be in the room and be part of the conversation
Yeah.
would be sick.
But in a way, we are part of the conversation because we're people like us are presenting these ideas online, and I don't know how much they will react to what gets said in the public about this proposal. I mean, it would influence me if I was making the decision. You know what I mean? Like if a lot of people were telling me, "Hey, this is going to impact a bunch of different people in a negative way," I'd be like, "Okay, how can we reshape what we're thinking of doing? How can we
Mm.
avoid those negative effects?" Right? So, hopefully, some college athletes speak up about it, and they figure out a way to balance this all out. I think that's where I will leave it. Oh, I forgot to mention my useless stat of the day. So my useless stat of the day. Oh my god, we didn't even talk about the transfer portal. So,
dude, that's another 45-minute conversation.
this is going to be our longest podcast ever. Okay.
Oh man, dude.
So, okay. So my useless stat of the day is that 11 FBS programs lost double-digit scholarship players to the first portal day that was open this year.
What?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, like, there were over 10 schools that lost, probably upwards of 20 players. Let's be honest. Some schools probably in the 20 player range just for football to the first day of the portal. The first day. That's crazy. And so it's useless in the fact that like that doesn't necessarily affect the whole, decision, the proposal that we're talking about, but it's useful in the fact that what does the transfer portal look like after this proposal?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, oh, I sit there. You can see me. I'm moving my face around these crazy ways because all I'm thinking is, why wouldn't the best player at every individual school just be like, "Hey, I'm the best player here. I know you want me. I'm going to show up.
Yeah.
And then go to
And
one of these big top 4 division
right.
schools.
And why
Top 4
wouldn't
conference
the
schools,
best
whatever it is.
right? Why wouldn't the best player be like, I'm gonna go play for this prestigious program who's offering me more money than you guys are. See ya, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
And that's gonna happen a lot more. It's gonna happen a lot more. It's the transfer portal is already so jam packed compared to what we've seen in the past. Like the last couple of years, it has been ridiculous the amount of transfers that have happened. It would get like the percentage of people that would be transferring, like people would be bouncing around like year to year at schools. And how does
and they already do.
I'm serious. I mean, that's what would happen is one school would offer them more money the next year, and then another school would offer them more money the next year if they're performing well, right? So, and how do degrees get passed along at universities at that point, right? Do you get a quarter of a degree from each school? Does your degree transfer over to 4 schools? Like, how does that work? You know what I mean? So just the possibilities out of the transfer portal alone, we could have an entire half an hour conversation about.
Massively, yeah. And it is hard to ponder and think about. And I'm thinking about European soccer right now. It's like, when is the last time that I really feel like I've seen a one club man who's been at the best of his game and has been one of the best in football? And it's something that's hard to see. Like, you think Francesco Totti, you think maybe if you're thinking, like for me, Brighton fan, I think Lewis Dunk, right? But in college sports, going and seeing somebody who goes to a school as a freshman and stays there for all 4 years is not something we've seen in a long time. Or for me, it feels like not something I've seen in a long time because of how active the transfer portal is right now. Right?
It's much less
because of the activity. And if the activity is only to increase, does that become a dying breed? Right? And that becomes something where a storyline, an attachment to a player, something where a player becomes a key part of a city or a school's history, no longer exists.
Yeah.
And that, for me as a sports fan, is heartbreaking.
Yeah. Because, and you know, I wonder how that affects fan interest levels too, because if you can't really get to know your players, why, I mean, you would only be interested for the brand of the school, essentially, right? If you're not rooting for your players, you're just rooting for the school. That's it. And, you know, a lot of schools who don't have success, like don't have winning records, that's what they end up doing because a lot of guys end up transferring out of those programs. But I think this would take that factor of the already, I'm going to say clunky transfer portal, because that's really kind of what it is clunky right now. I think that would heighten it by a factor of 10, possibly more, you know, like could be 100. I don't know. What number to put on there, but I think it would make the number of transfers significantly increase. That's what we're talking about. And I think it would change the way people look at the college experience as an athlete. People would view it going forward as you go to this school to get started, and if you work hard enough and you play hard and you have success, then you can go to this big university, which can open up more opportunities for you, which can open up more opportunities for you, and so on and so forth. And how does that affect eligibility? Oh my God, how does that even affect eligibility? Another useless stat of the day. I saw there was a college football player today that just applied for and got his 9th year of eligibility. 9th year. He was in the same class, recruiting class, as Jalen Hurts, who's been in the NFL for like 4 seasons. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous, right? I mean, we're seeing these extremes, and in his case, it was because he had injuries in like 3 or 4 seasons, so he was able to apply for 3 or 4 extra seasons, which
plus
COVID, which makes sense when you do the math out. But you know, how does the transfer portal under this proposal, how does that work with eligibility? You know what I mean? Does eligibility change because people are changing schools so much because of the money factor? You know, there are like huge trickle down effects that nobody's even thought about yet, and it's crazy that we're already at an hour and have not gotten to our sports quote of the weeks. By the way,
glad we only decided with one topic tonight, Paul.
Yeah, I texted you. I was like, "Do you think we need another topic?" And you were like, "Nah, we should be good for a half hour." And we're an
Especially because
hour
my
in.
sports quote of the week I could talk about for about 30 minutes. So,
Yeah. Maybe we should even do like a separate Nah, we're not going to do a separate episode
maybe two. I don't know.
because working to find a time that works for both of our schedules is really tough. That's why we haven't been
Paul,
able to
let's record
do.
at like 2 a.m. tomorrow night. We'll make it work.
That would be a trip. Good God.
Red Bull in a dream, brother.
Yeah, Red Bull in a dream. Right.
Red Bull, cocaine in a dream. Okay.
No. I'm cutting that out. Oh, that's only for us. Okay.
I do not endorse
wanna...
the use or active use of drugs or alcohol.
There we go. That's a sports business take right there. Okay. I almost want to leave that in just because it's hilarious.
I covered my butt. I'm just saying, we're good. Leave it in there. Full flow.
All right. Now it's time for our sports quote of the weeks. Okay, so mine's a little bit different than the traditional route that we usually do. This could be a whole nother topic on its own. So this is from an article from an ESPN reporter, not from an athlete or coach like we typically do. So in this article, it says customers will be able to access their local team's content on Prime Video channels or Diamond Sports, meaning Diamond Sports, the media company, has rights. Pricing and availability will be announced at a later date. Regional sports content will also remain available on cable and satellite providers. So I think this is interesting because, to explain some context, Diamond Sports is the group that provides a lot of the cable services. They have contracts with teams that put their content out on cable. So to then say we're going to be partners with Amazon now for a large, or at least a good percentage of our content, is still furthering what we're seeing in the shift to streaming, in the viewership experience of sports. It furthers that shift to streaming. And, how does that affect cable TV? Because sports are holding up cable TV right now. That is the reality of the world. So how does less sports being on cable TV and more sports being on streaming than there was already that trend, but how does this move impact it even more? You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Which I think is just super interesting to think about.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, again, we're talking about shifts that we're going to continue to see for 5, 10, 15, those coming years, about how our sports as a whole unit, how the information is consumed, which money goes where, how it all changes. And this is part of that step. And it's definitely interesting to see where it goes. And hopefully, best of luck that it works out for the better of our sports franchises and for all of our sports overall, especially pro sports.
Yeah, for sure. Just going to be super interesting to see how it develops and how they balance still. Like they did say they're still going to deliver it to cable, which is good to hear, that people won't have to sign up for streaming services and, sign off of cable or in addition to cable, because not everybody wants to sign off of cable in place of streaming, so a lot of people add it as an addition. And I think being able to have it on both avenues creates some balance there, at least. So I think that's a good thing.
Absolutely.
Let's go on to your sports quote of the week.
Yeah, absolutely. So I took a line from Kylian Mbappe. I saw this, and we've talked about this months in advance when we heard about Pedri's injury. If you don't, not Pedri, I'm sorry, Gavi's injury when he was playing for the Spain national team, where he tore his ACL. If you haven't heard about that, or if you're not into soccer, it's essentially a career-ending injury, right? Not career-ending, but he's out for 9 months. Kylian Mbappe had this to say: "We're getting closer to the NBA model with seasons of 70 games." Mbappe said, "Personally, I'm not against playing that many matches, but we won't be able to be good every time and give the public the spectacle they expect. In the NBA, players don't play every game, and franchises practice load management. But if I said I'm tired of not playing on Saturday, it wouldn't go down well," referencing to the fact that fans would probably riot in the streets. The spectator who pays for his ticket and who may only see you once during the season wants to see a performance worthy of the name, and that's understandable. I don't want to preach, but we need to think together about how to offer the best possible solution so that players, spectators, and football's governing bodies can all embrace it. Mbappe goes on to have 5 or 6 other quotes throughout this article. But
I mean,
to the fact of where does the soccer model go?
Yeah, what we're talking about is workload management, right? I think load management. That's really what it's called.
Yes.
And I think soccer is definitely a very taxing sport in terms of cardio, right? And asking guys to lengthen their season definitely can lead to injuries because people are pushing themselves to a point where they haven't gone before. I do think that from a sports organization perspective, that it would be beneficial. Obviously, more games, more money, right? Think about it from a front office perspective, but you do have to think about it from a player perspective. Would that be ideal? Is that a reasonable ask of them? What do you think? Being a soccer player, is that a reasonable ask of them? And I know we could talk about this for a long time.
And I think for me as a player, availability is the best ability. That's the one ability I have, God damn it. But really, as a soccer player, that's not something that you can do. You can't go and train 5 days out of every week and train hard and then go and play in a hard game. And you're playing 2 or 3 games a week, right? That's asking for an injury to happen.
You need
right?
some
And
recovery.
to do that year round, it's really hard to do, right? You need a time where your body's getting out of that system. You're able to rest, relax. And we're thinking about football players of CTE, all these issues happening there. When does that start to happen in soccer because of overuse injuries where people are affected for the rest of their life more than they already are, especially with headers or with contact and non-contact injuries becoming far more likely the more games.
Yeah, I was going to say like the ACL injuries would be the first thing that came to my mind is you would see those skyrocket, right? Because I think the primary injury that most soccer players have are ACL tears. I know a lot of my friends who play soccer in college or not have had at least one, if not two, surgeries on their legs, if not ACL tears. So how do you add extra games and expect the injuries to not increase, right? So really, it almost becomes a player safety issue. And I'm not going to say what the right answer is. I'm not smart enough to know what the right answer is, if they can handle it or if they can't handle it. I think you would really have to hear from people like Kylian Mbappe to say we can handle this or we shouldn't do this. And I almost think in that way it should be up to the players. Like maybe there should be a vote on it. Like they should have a say in it, or at least a percentage of the vote should go to the players if you're implementing a new game schedule or a new game model.
Absolutely, well said, and that's a great take, Paul. I think the hardest part of it, right, is these games are all coming from different competitions, right? So for these players at the elite level, we're seeing it come from, for Kylian Mbappe in this example, Ligue 1, right? He has 38 games in Ligue 1 per year, all right? So that's pretty much one game a week for 38 consecutive weeks, right? Maybe they have 1 or 2 weeks off or they don't have a game in Ligue 1, right? Then you have the Champions League, which you have group stage, and then you have the knockout round, and there's only more games the further you go, right? And then you have the French Cup, right? So they're competing in that, and PSG pretty much wins it every year, so they go throughout the entire level of that. And then you have another national cup, right, which PSG is required to participate in because they're part of FFF, right? So that's another 20 games that he has to play. And he can't realistically go and play every single game. In addition to, now we have a summer tournament, right? So the Euros are this summer, 2024, then followed by the Olympics, right?
Yeah.
The French Football Federation is sending a team to both of those tournaments.
Yeah, they have a lot more commitments than just, the one season. They're playing on national teams, they're playing on Olympic teams. They are playing year round, so I do think adding more games really makes it tough on their workload. And it'll be interesting to see what the player reaction going forward is like to this type of a proposal. if they agree with it, if they don't agree with it, and whether it gets implemented or not, and how that goes over the first season or two if it happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a hard thing to think. And I really think of when do players, because players have talked about this being a problem for the last 2-3 seasons. When do they just say, no, I'm not going to play?
Yeah.
And does that happen?
Do you take rest days?
Do you say, I'm taking a forced rest day? Do I take a load management day like Kylian Mbappe is saying? Or do you say no to your national team? I'm not playing this summer. And what does that do to your standing as a professional player in your country?
How do you prioritize that too? Do you prioritize your Olympic and national teams over your club? How does the priority rank for each individual player? And is there a standard that of how it should be viewed? So definitely big questions that need to be answered.
Correct. And I think the last point I'll make here is the clear answer that's been pointed out by a lot of these elite clubs like a PSG is to put together a massive squad. Look at a Man City who has best players in the world, 2 of them in every position, right? And you go and do that, and then you ask, where's competitive advantage? Where's the competitive edge where you go and you look at a Brighton or let's say a Burnley who maybe don't have as many games, but they can't compete at that level, so they're never going to rise. They're going to have a much harder time rising up the ranks of the Premier League without investing this immense amount of money to have to go and compete with a Manchester City, right?
Yeah.
So it creates a competitive difference between these teams because one team's going to have a massive squad and it's going to collect all these players who are the best players in the league, and there's not going to be a distribution of talent, so it creates a problem. Not something we see in the NBA. Is it something we see in the NBA?
That's a whole different
salary caps, not really.
That's
a whole different
topic.
But state of soccer world.
It'll be interesting to see going forward. I think that's probably a good place to end the day. We've probably talked ourselves out. I think it was a great episode, though. Honestly, I really think we hit the nail on the head with this one. So thank you guys for listening. I'll see you at your swim meet on Saturday. We're really looking forward to that. Getting some more.
We're gonna have some fun bits.
Yeah. Oh my God!
I'm a character on the pool deck. I'm a character on the pool deck, man.
We could create content for the podcast because I'm doing this. I could take some of the videos and upload them to the socials so easily because it's my camera. Okay. So look out for that, guys. And if you don't know how
get ready to see Zach swim to 1 a.m.
If you don't know how to follow us on social media, we are SBT_podcast on Instagram, SBT.pod23 on TikTok, and SBT_pod23 on Twitter. I think that one's right. I should know that, but as always, thank you guys for listening. If you made it to the end of today's episode, congratulations, because it is one of our longer ones, but I think it's worth it. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll see you next week. Boom, mic drop, out.